You're right. Okay, the environment. Let's see what we can say about the environment. Okay, so obviously we all know this. We are in an environmental crisis. We are, scientists are predicting that if we don't change our ways radically, we are headed towards some kind of cosmic catastrophe, right? Um, so when philosophers look at where we are today, right, ethicists and so forth, what I've been reading is many people actually blame the Western concept of the subject, which they say actually stems from the biblical concept of the subject, of the self, right? So let me explain a little bit some of these things that people are saying, right? They're saying that the West sees the human being as a superior form of life, right? And so everything in the world, in a way, is made for the human being. So there's no sense that the nature and so forth has its own value apart from being used by us, right? So we walk around the earth not as though we are part of the earth, but as though we are some kind of royalty, right? Who can enslave anything we want to, whether it's animals or vegetation, right? We have this sort of absolute power, right? We can imprison animals, we can kill them, we can eat them, we can, destroy entire forests, and we feel perfectly like this is legitimate. Like we are allowed to do this, right? Walk through the earth as though we are kind of some kind of royalty, right? A lot of these authors who are mentioning this view are blaming it on the Genesis 1, where it is told that human beings will rule the earth, right? And they say, see, this is where we're getting this twisted view of human beings as the center of the universe, as some kind of royalty, right? So I want to respond briefly to this view that the Hebrew Bible is the source of all our woes, environmental woes. Genesis 2 has a different approach, which interestingly, Peterson, you'll be so interested in this because of your Native American background, is that the word that is used in Genesis 2 is to serve, actually, or work, it's the same word, and protect the earth, right? In Genesis 1, right, we have rule, dominate, right? But in Genesis 2, we have a different perspective. We have two words. We have to serve or to work, and we have protect, right? So when I read about Native American approach to the environment, and this was found in, I always forget her name. There's an environmentalist in, I don't even know where she is, but in the United States, right? She's quite well known. I'll have to look up her. There's two things I have to look up, the Touré Roberts, right? And this Native American environmentalist, right? And she says that there's a special duty in her tribe, and it's basically to protect the patch of land that they were given. This is why it is so traumatic when the Americans came, or the Europeans came to the Americas, and they displaced the Native Americans. It wasn't just that they lost their land and they lost their sustenance, right? They lost their ways and their culture. All of this, of course, happened, but more specifically, they lost their divine calling to protect and work that particular spot of land, right? There is a strong belief in many Native American tribes that God gave them this land to be responsible for. And so not only their culture, their sustenance is taken away, but their divine calling, their responsibility they have been given for that particular patch of land, right? So I was so struck by how the Native American, this kind of duty to protect the land echoed, right, with Genesis 2, right? So ultimately Genesis 2 is specifying how we are to rule, right? We are not to rule by dominating and taking and exploiting. It's giving us it's zooming in, right? What does it mean to rule? Genesis 1. It means to serve or work, and it means to protect, right? So that's very interesting perspective. So we see already that the biblical narrative, right, doesn't mean to exploit or to dominate. It means to protect and to serve, right? Kind of like the cops in New York, serve and protect. Well, we hope. So, okay, so you have this, right? By the way, there are many laws in the environmental laws in the Hebrew Bible, right? You have the law about not cultivating the field after 7 years, right? This is a way to say, you know, let the land rest, right? You have the several laws. I'm trying to think of the most peculiar one. It's not coming to my mind, but there's several environmental laws where, yeah, you have the law not to, this is a good one, not to kill, not to destroy. You can cut down the fruit, but you cannot cut down the forest. I think there's something like that. Oh, I have to remember where it is. Something when they, you have laws of war. When there's a war, you don't cut down the trees. You can destroy everything, but not the trees. This is an interesting text. And you have the law that you can, that's it. You can eat the animal, but you cannot drink the blood. It's interesting. I wonder if you've thought about what that means. What it's actually saying is you can kill the particular animal, but you cannot kill life. So we are taught by the Hebrew Bible that yes, maybe we will need to kill, but we need to make sure when we kill or use or exploit that we don't destroy the whole species or cut down the whole forest, right? So there is leeway in the Bible for killing or taking, but we always have to be careful that our taking doesn't reach the point that we're destroying the whole ecosystem, right? So there's a number of environmental laws in the Hebrew Bible, actually. And then, of course, you have the Genesis 1 story of vegetarianism, right? In Genesis 1, God gives the human beings the ideal diet, right? Which is to eat the fruit and the grains and grasses of the fields, right? And obviously you have Jesus later who comes up, well, he's eating fish, but but you have with Jesus a kind of symbiosis with nature, right? Jesus is always going into nature, either to pray or to teach, right? There he has this is somebody who has a deep connection, almost spiritual connection with nature, right? And finally, of course, the book of Revelation, when it mentions to make all things new, actually includes making nature new again, right? So are you seeing how the biblical narrative actually very, very interested in the environment and has a number of laws to protect the environment? We're not there yet as a civilization, right? The archaic Bible is further ahead of us when it comes to environmental protection. So anyways, let's go back to development and see the approach here to the environment. So it's a typical Western approach, right? Where very often the environment is sacrificed for economic development, right? There was a student of mine a few years ago who was from South Sudan. And we talked about this topic and he said, well, you know, in South Sudan, we have no other resources than oil. And yes, oil is a very polluting and, you know, it's a very messy business in terms of the environment, but we need it to get the country started, right? So many people will tell you, right? We need to make this sacrifice. We need to sacrifice the environment for the sake of economic development and so forth, right? Now, in this class, we're going to look at alternatives to this approach, right? It always seems like we have no choice, right? We have no choice but to build this dam. We have no choice but to deforest this area. We have no choice but to, you know, go into, you know, fossil fuels and so forth, right? So we always think we have no choice. We have several choices. So in this class, in the next hour, we will talk a little bit about some of the options, right, that we have. So first of all, one of the ways that environmentalists have responded, right, to this idea that we have to exploit the environment in order to create economic development is to follow it in a way the African way that we talked about, right? Remember I told you the African way is that we are interconnected, including with nature, right? Whatever happens to nature happens to me. Nature, right? So in other words, there is this view in many African cultures that I and nature are one. So whatever is happening to nature actually influencing me. If nature is dying, I am dying, right? And the most vocal proponent of most vocal activist who talks about this connection is the Kenyan Wangari Matai. Let's talk a little bit about her because we're going to read her a bit. Wangari Matai is from Kenya. She used to be in the government. And then she switched to being an activist, and she has been doing a lot of work for environmental protection in Kenya, especially the protection of forests, right? So she has a number of books that I really suggest you read, right? I forgot the names right now, but any book she wrote is amazing, right? And so we'll read some of her quotes, but she says in essence, right, that there is a connection between the degradation of the environment and the degradation of the quality of human life, right? And she notices that when we degrade the environment, we create more problems than solutions, right? We create displacement, we create wars, we create pollution, right? So she's saying there is an actual connection between the degradation of the environment in a given place and the degradation of the quality of human life. So maybe the GDP is doing well, but the quality of human life suffers, right? Okay, any questions so far, or comments or observations of what I've been talking about? Shumko, go ahead, Shumko.
Shumko? You mentioned about this point where you say you can eat the animal but don't drink the blood. So basically, it's okay to kill but don't destroy the entire species. But with us human beings, and there are so many of us around this earth that we think, okay, well, I'm just going to eat one. It's not going to make much difference. But accumulated, it makes huge impact. So this, I think in psychological terms, it's called this something about divided responsibility or something, where you, because so many people live around the earth, you feel a lot less responsible for the environment, thinking, no, somebody else can do it, not me. Yeah. So I'm not sure I don't think this approach would work globally.
Yeah, again, right, when we talk about ethics, right, it's always a vision, right? It's never reality. And it's always a vision we should strive for, even if it will not necessarily, even if pragmatically it doesn't seem possible, it's still a vision we have to maintain, right? So in that sense, I would suggest like individual motivation can still make a difference, because you're still embodying the vision, right? I say this to when I explained how I explained this in the context of how do we help the kingdom come about, right? When we talk about the kingdom of God as Christians, how we have to usher in the kingdom of God. Obviously, we don't have the power to change the law and deal with these corporations. Obviously, we cannot, convince certain politicians. We don't have much power, right? But what we have is to keep the light of the vision alive, right? As long as there is one tiny light in a very dark room, you have already something going on. So my attitude has been, I will let my light shine where I am not going to drink the blood, quote unquote, right? And as I turn my light on, it keeps the vision alive, right? I think that as Christians, we are meant less to make the vision possible than to keep the vision alive, right? We cannot make the vision possible. Only God can dominate these principalities that are in the world. But our role, in my view, is to keep the vision alive, is to keep the light. And this we can do as individuals. As individuals, you can make the decision, I'm not going to drink the blood. I mean, but not literally, right? But in the sense of, if there is a problem and this kind of fish is endangered and we are depleting the ocean of this kind of fish, I'm not going to eat this fish, right? Or if we have an issue, right, with pollution, you are going to tell yourself, I'm going to ride my bicycle more, right? So, but in doing so, yes, you're not changing anything. We cannot change anything, but we can keep the light alive and we can keep the vision alive. Does that make sense, Shumko? We have to realize what is our true power. We do not have the power to change the world. I don't believe that, but we have the power to keep the vision alive. And this is what we ought to do, right? So good. Any other questions on what we just said? And I like what you're saying here in the chat, Shumko, small seeds, right? Absolutely. The kingdom of God starts with a tiny seed. You never know what you can do, what will happen once you plant that tiny seed, right? Great. Okay, no more comments? moving forward. Okay, so one of the ways, so there's three ways I'm going to propose, right? There's the first way is the way we have no choice. This is the way that is happening right now, right? We have no choice. We have to burn fossil fuels, we have to build this dam, we have to do all these things for the sake of economic development. I'm going to give you two alternative routes. First one is the route, I'm going to write them here in the chat, the route of green energy. And then the second one we'll see is the actual paradigm shift. Route of green energy is still within our present paradigm, right? So a lot of people are talking about, you know, let's continue to produce economic development, but we can do it by shifting our sources of energy, right? We can still create jobs, we can still produce energy, we can still have all of our amenities, we can still have electricity and so forth, but we need to be smart about it. Let's be smart about it and do it in a way that is harmonious with nature rather than conflictual with nature, right? So there's a big trend today, right? To shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy. There is a trend to develop technologies that do not pollute, such as electric cars and so forth. And we are still saying we can still live, we can still progress, we can still develop without destroying the earth, right? And I think Wangari Matai also talks about this, where she says that Africa, precisely because it is not fully developed yet, she says, has the opportunity to take the other route than the West, right? This is an incredible opportunity to take a different path, right? Because it is not yet fully at the same level of the West, there's an opportunity to part ways here. And she says, we should be, she's saying, I'm reading from one of her works, Africa, she says, should be the prime target of investors in renewables, right? She's saying this, we need to take that route and be smart about things and think about the ultimate future and do things better. Right? We don't have to blindly follow the blind and end up in the cosmic catastrophe where we are headed. We can take a better path, she says, and let's do it. We have, for example, Algeria, the country of Algeria, is the #1 exporter of solar energy because they have the Sahara Desert, right? So she's saying we have so many ways we can do this, right? And we are not even thinking about it because we're blindly following in the footsteps of the West, right? So this is a very interesting, I think, direction that most countries are trying to steer towards more or less easily. So any questions or comments or examples? I have one example in the university, the Adventist University in Ghana. I remember, it's so smart. Ghana is very hot in the summer and we teach in the summer. And they had built a building with holes in the wall. So there was a draft continuously. And I was teaching there and it worked. It was super hot outside, but because the walls had holes, right? I mean, it was nicely done. It wasn't a weird thing. There was a continuous draft, meaning that we were able to survive, right? The hot weather. This is just one example of being creative, right? And do things differently. Any other examples you want to share and about renewables that you've witnessed? Go ahead, Shumko, tell us a little bit more about what you're talking about.
In Syria, in rural areas, they have these interesting buildings. They look like upside down cone, kinda, with really, really, really thick walls. It's like a meter or even more thick walls, but they have holes inside. And the interesting thing is that in the summer, it provides this draft in between, keeping it cool. In the winter, it keeps it warm because they have the fireplace inside, the thick walls keep the warmth inside. So, and this is the old styles that they used to have.
Yeah.
So, and they're actually quite spacious inside, and you have everything you need. You can separate rooms and stuff. If I find a picture, I might throw it in the chat.
Nice, excellent. Yeah, there were some very smart architects in the past, right? If you go to Spain, to the Alhambra of Granada, which is a castle in Spain, I'm writing it down here. I don't know if, oops, just one, Granada. Okay, they have the system of air conditioning where they had a kind of water flowing at the bottom of the household, and the water would cool the whole palace, right? They had a kind of a house river flowing continuously through the house, and it's in the desert pretty much. The Alhambra, it's a very dry area, but because they had this underground river going on, it would cool the whole house down. Okay, I see a couple more hands. Uwinesa, go ahead.
I am going to give an example of Rwanda. There is a policy on environment protection. They ban to use plastic bag. And when they started to talk about this, we said, how can we live without plastic? But now you can't find plastic bag in Rwanda. We are using other material. Even if when you have a plastic bag, it should be biodegradable. So we also have in that policy to plant more trees and to have more space for green space. So if you come in Rwanda, in Kigali, capital city, you find really the country is green, and you see the difference when you come from another country.
I have to say, when I was in Rwanda, it was like, for me, Rwanda made me think of Switzerland in Europe. If you're familiar with the country of Switzerland, it's a country where there's perfect order. It's the one most organized country of Europe. It has perfect order. Everything is clean. Everything is sparkling. Everything is organized. The Rwanda had this impression on me. And it was exactly at the time when the plastic bags were banned. When I was in the airplane, there was we could read that we couldn't bring any plastic bags in the country. And yeah, this is working very well. This guy, I tell you, Kagame is, he's the best. He's the best. I really like this guy. So, okay, a very good example. Anything else? Or, you know, or objections to what we're talking about, you know, where you're saying, well, this is all very nice, but okay. Y'all just want to finish, I know. Okay, so now we move to the second way, right? So we talked about, you know, still developing, but doing it smartly through green technology. But actually, there's a critic of that, and his name is John Ehrenfeld, which we'll read in a second. And he's somebody who says that ultimately, all this talk of green technology is not going to work. And the reason for this is that he thinks that as long as we are in the paradigm of progress, we are going to continuously deplete the earth more and more, right? In other words, as long as we're thinking of progress in terms of possessions, we're going to continuously want to possess more and more, right? To be, if to be wealthy means you have 2 cars instead of 1, 2 houses instead of 1, right? If being wealthy means, you know, you can travel as much as you want, and so forth, right? We have a concept of well-being, which is based on material wealth, the accumulation of material wealth. Even today, if you go to the United States, everybody has, like, every garage has 3 cars. Everybody is traveling all over the world, right? There is air conditioning throughout the year, including in the winter. We use massive amount of energy, right? So, and this is our concept of comfort and wealth and well-being. Imagine you take that away, we're going to go crazy. So he says, as long as we have a concept of well-being in terms of material possessions, we, as the population, as people, as countries get developed, they want to imitate this model. More and more people will have 3 cars. More and more people will have 2 houses. More and more people will travel. And the earth will be completely destroyed within about 20 years, right? So he's saying this view of well-being in terms of material possessions needs to shift to a different view of well-being in terms of being, not having. Right? In other words, he's saying, as long as we have this idea that well-being and development has to do with material possessions, as other countries get developed, they will imitate the model of the West, and we will completely deplete the resources of the world, right? So he says, what we need really is a paradigm shift from having to being. Let me write this in the chat, right? So he says we need a paradigm shift from having to being, where we define well-being completely differently. I think I was trying to talk about that the other day, right? Not in terms of, you know, material opportunities, but in terms of spiritual opportunities, right? So we're going to read about him in just a second, where you'll get more details, but this is what he's saying. As long as we are as long as we define well-being in material terms, we are going to be following the destructive path of the West. We need to shift, including the West, by the way, right? This is not just, let us continue to exploit everything. You guys do some, you know, spiritual work, right? No, as a whole, the universe needs to shift its paradigm and realize that you can be happy with less, right? You don't need to do all these trips. You don't need to have 2 cars. You don't need to have the air conditioning all day long, right? You can actually shift the way you live and find your well-being elsewhere, right? Maybe in community, maybe in spiritual work, maybe live more simply, but have a different type of happiness, right? That's what he's saying we ought to do. So any questions on this before we read the actual text? Questions or comments? Okay, so let's go read a few texts on this issue. There's, I'm gonna just write some of these authors. We're gonna find Senghor again, right? With the African way. We're gonna see, what is her name? Vandana Shiva, this is a new one. Just a few words on her. Vandana Shiva is a Indian from India, environmentalist. And she has been behind the concept of ecofeminism. Just a few words on that. Ecofeminism is the notion that the exploitation of nature, there's a connection, she says, between the exploitation of nature and the exploitation of woman, right? So she's saying, as long as the Western self thinks it can dominate everything, right? This will, both women and nature will suffer, right? So she's saying, as we free women, we need to free nature, right? To free nature is to free the woman. Why? Because you're teaching the Western self to control itself, to control its greed. So if the Western self learns to respect nature, she says, it will automatically change his relationships with the women of his life, right? Because they are connected. So this is kind of what she means by eco, from ecology, ecofeminism. She's saying when we finally raise the awareness that nature must be respected, automatically the dynamic of relationships between man and woman throughout the world will shift, and woman will finally be free, right? So she says something like that. And then we'll read Ehrenfeld, John Ehrenfeld. And a little bit of, is Wangari Matai? No, I just mentioned her. Okay, so let's turn to syllabus page 9. First paragraph is Senghor. So I will designate based on the chat, since y'all, so the last person to talk was Shumko. Shumko, you are our Senghor. Top of page 9. Go ahead.
Let us consider the European as he faces an object, objective intelligence, a man of will, a warrior, a bird of prey, a steady gaze. White men are cannibals. They have no respect for life. It is this prospect of devouring which they call humanizing nature, or more exactly, domesticating nature. What they don't take into account is that life cannot be domesticated.
Okay, let's stop on that briefly, right? So what he's saying when he talks about white men, he's talking about the Western concept of the self, right? Which, by the way, you can find across the board in terms of races, right? This Western concept of the self as dominating is not necessarily only white. At least that's how I see it. But nevertheless, point taken, right? So he's saying the Western concept, right? When they look at the world, they don't see something that merits to exist on its own. They just see something that they need to devour, right? That's why he says, he's kind of, you know, being ironic when he says it's the white men who are the cannibals, right? The primitives, not us, because they have no respect for life, unlike us, right? Africans, he's saying. So he's saying that this process of devouring has been the attitude of the Western mindset, right? Everything is there for me to take. And in that sense, he says, and yet what he doesn't realize is that life cannot be domesticated. In other words, what we are missing as Westerners when we just take is the sacred sanctity, beauty of life, right? We are missing the spiritual experience we could be having with nature when we just see nature as something to devour. We're missing a genuine encounter with nature, right? In the style that Jesus had, right? With nature, we're missing the spiritual nourishment we could receive from nature because we are only interested in taking and scavenging, right? Any questions or comments on this particular text? Okay, Shumko, take us further.
Totemism, apparently so, unnatural, yet only apparently so. What is really unnatural and inhumane is to isolate man from his environment and to domesticate animal or tree. This domestication in Europe reaches the point of destruction, disturbing the balance of nature and eventually producing the catastrophes against which we are warmed by science.
Okay, so again, this notion of the Western idea that we are isolated from the environment, that somehow what happens to the environment doesn't concern us, right? And the idea, I like the way he says it, that we can domesticate the animal and the tree, right? We are missing yeah, we are not seeing them as sacred dimensions, right? We think we can just grab anything. Very nice. Last two lines. Shumko?
Morality consists in not breaking the communion of the living, the dead, and the spirits and God. The African's contribution to the religious sense lies in his faculty of perceiving the supernatural in the natural.
Okay, now you have a clear view of the African ethics of the environment, right? This is different from the European view. The European view is that the environment is there to be possessed, right? Here we have a different view. This is again the African way, right? He's saying it very nicely. We are interconnected. And morality is not breaking this connection, right? Morality is taking care of the environment because ultimately it is taking care of ourselves, right? And finally, the idea of seeing the spiritual within nature, right? The idea that nature is spiritual and that nature brings spiritual nourishment, right? Even if you're a good Christian, if you're just at home, reading your Bible at home and then sitting in church, listening to sermons in church, you are not connecting truly to the divine energy, right? I mean, we know that even from the New Testament, right? The way that Jesus wasn't sitting in the synagogue. Jesus, when he needed to resource himself spiritually, where did he go? To the temple? To the synagogue? Where did he go when he needed spiritual resourcing? Tell me.
The mountaintop.
Exactly. He would go outside. Yeah, absolutely. Right? He would go in nature. And so the New Testament, the Gospels, at least the way that Jesus moved around, right, is very African, right? He really realized that my spiritual connection with God is found in communion with nature, and we are losing this, right? We are always stuck inside of the buildings, air-conditioned buildings. It's dreadful, right? And we're missing the supernatural that is expressed in the natural. We are missing this connection to the spirit when we are missing nature. And so here you have beautiful exposition, right, of an alternative approach to nature. Excellent. Any questions, objections, examples? You're very quiet today. Okay. So.
Yeah, Professor.
Go ahead, Kayumba. It's been a while.
Can I say? Yeah. So actually, I think even if Western they are sacrificing environment in place of economics development, but also these days they come back and support some environment initiatives, which is good. I think in this course we have been really criticizing the Western and everything, but on my side, I think those people we have a lot to learn from them. Mm-hmm. Because if you can manage to to do the best you can, then you come back and donate and support the community. I think now the Western people, they understand the concept of protecting environment, and most of the funding here in Africa is from Western people. So most of the time, especially here, the young people, we criticize Western people, but those people, I think we have a lot to learn from them, because sometimes we criticize them that they keep power for long. One Indian said that if you are not in the shoes of someone, it's very easy to criticize. So for me, if they keep power and keep what they are doing, I think it's good for them. And anyone who has power, he wants to keep it. So for us, I think in this course, what we can take like a go home is that we can learn from them. Why? Most of my friends from Western, one thing I liked from them, they are good planners. They have a clear picture of what they want. So I think, and that is why I think they keep on power for long, which is good. So, and also they are here to support our environment in some donations, because they already understand that now the world is interconnected. Thank you.
Okay, excellent, very nice. Yeah, we know that the West is a mixed bunch, right? There is some good, there is some bad. Absolutely, very nice. Anything else? Shumko, I'm reading your thing in the chat. Great. Okay, so let's switch to Vandana Shiva. Let's see. I was gonna look at the last person in the chat, but it's Shumko again, so let's not. Apenteng, you're the next one in my chat. Go ahead for Vandana Shiva.
Sure. Okay, so the effort to create a holistic all life of reason, cosmology, and anthropology must necessarily imply a concept of freedom different from that used since the Enlightenment. This involves rejecting the notion that man's freedom and happiness depends on an ongoing process of emancipation from nature, on independence from and dominance over natural processes by the power of reason and rationality. To find freedom does not involve subjugating or transcending the realm of necessity, but rather focusing on developing a vision of freedom, happiness, the good life within the limits of necessity of nature.
Okay, good, right? What we're seeing here again is this notion that happiness has to do with dominating nature. Okay, to the degree that I am not going to be cold at night, that I'm going to have, all the food I want, right? We are always thinking in terms of, let me free myself from the cold, from the sickness, from the vulnerability. So in history, right, historically speaking, we have seen our happiness as an emancipation from nature, right? And now I have a big house, I have air conditioning, I have a refrigerator for my, I can transport myself. And we are seeing happiness as a way to be, in a way, separate from nature. We are finally able to not be submitted to the harshness of nature, right? We are able to escape the harsh life of living strictly in nature. So she's saying, well, this is not, right? We need to redefine what it means to be well, what it means to be happy in terms of not escaping nature, but dwelling within nature. So she's kind of reversing the Western view that I'll be happy when I escape all of the difficulties of nature. And she's saying, no, we should be happy within while dwelling within nature, right? That's kind of what she's saying. Okay, continue, Apenteng, next paragraph for Shiva.
Sure. So ecofeminism is about connectedness and wholeness of theory and practice. The corporate and military warriors' aggression against the environment was perceived almost physically as an aggression against our female body. Rediscovery of sacredness of life. This quality is not located in an otherworldly deity, in the transcendence, but in everyday life, in our work, the things that surround us, in our immanence to re-enchant the world.
Exactly, right? So here she's talking about an alternative form of spirituality, right? For too long, we have been worshiping a deity which is outside of nature, right? Which is beyond nature. Nature doesn't matter. And she's saying, no, God is also within nature, right? God is also expressing himself within nature. And so she's saying we need to recover the connection with God through nature. We have lost this way to connect to God. When we connect to God, we close our eyes, fold our hands, isolate ourselves, think of something beyond the stars, right? And she's saying, no, God is also present in nature. We are missing opportunities to connect with God when we are forgetting the sacredness of life, right? That's what she's saying, that God can be met through the communion with nature, and we're missing these encounters because we are thinking of God as beyond nature, right? Any questions on Shiva, Vandana Shiva, or objections or criticisms? Hey, moving on to Shumko, is that a question or just you're just moving around? Okay. All right, so who's my next victim? Let's see. Peterson. There you are. I found you. You're going to read Ehrenfeld.
Ehrenfeld. What page is that on?
9. And it's
Page
1,
9.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraph on page 9.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. The reason that the world is in such bad shape is because our dominant social paradigm no longer fits the world. We need a new story to guide us. We need a new paradigm. The central problem with our current culture is that the dominant notion of rationality is that of economic man, Homo economicus. In this model of thinking, human beings are always attempting to make the most of things, using their resources to maximize their well-being, happiness, pleasure, or whatever word is used to speak about satisfying the self. As individuals, we are always presumed to act in our own self-interest. That is, to satisfy individual needs. To be truly authentic, to realize the potential of flourishing, we need a shift from a view of ourselves first, from one of having to one of being. And second, from one of needing to one of caring.
Okay, thank you. Right, this is the summary of what we were studying earlier, what I mentioned about Ehrenfeld, right? He's talking about a new story. If we're really going to resolve the problem where we are, we need to shift the paradigm away from, and he says this here, right? We need to a shift, okay, yeah. Last line, we need a shift from a view of ourselves from having to one of being, right? Stopping to think about, we need to stop thinking about development in terms of material well-being, right? All of us, right? Not just developing countries. The developed countries also need to shift and shift it to being, right? We can be well without so much wealth and so forth, right? And then of course shifting from needing to caring, right? In other words, shifting from taking, being responsible for the world. How? Go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to say I've kind of seen this play out in real life. I used to help deliver fancy yachts. And one of the people that I helped deliver a yacht for was one of the Rothschilds. And this guy was worth, a billion and some, maybe a couple billion. But he was the most miserable, sad, and afraid individual I've ever known. He was worried about his house in Long Island being damaged by storms. He was worried about losing the money in his bank account. The guy lived in fear. He's one of the most miserable people I've ever known. And it was interesting because just a couple months later, I was in a really rural part of Nepal where the people didn't have anything. But there was a lot more peace and happiness in some of the people in Nepal than there was in this guy whose yacht I was delivering. So there is really some truth to these ideas we're describing here, where sometimes there is actually an inverse relationship between acquiring material possessions and our own peace and well-being, really.
Okay, very good. Nice illustration of Ehrenfeld. Let's see, there's Shumko. Go ahead, Shumko.
Sorry, I feel like I'm commenting a lot today.
It's all good.
I don't know if this is called Calvinism or not, but in some cultures or some religions in general, it's viewed, and I think even in Adventism to some extent, that if you have things, if you have a nice house, if you have a car, if you're able to send your children to get a good education, you're blessed. So you're in favor of God. That means you're doing something right, therefore you must be happy. And when people don't have much, but they're happy, it looked upon as something, oh, that's nice, but are you truly happy, kind of thing. I think there is also connection with the way we perceive having things, not just that make us happy, but they also make somebody look good and better in our eyes.
Absolutely, right? A lot of the accumulation of wealth is not so much to be happier, is to look good in the eyes of the world, right? I mean, just to take the Rothschild, right? I think it's Bill Gates who said after the first million, it doesn't change much, right? The difference in terms of happiness, right? So often the accumulation continues. Why? Because there is a status to maintain. There is some reason, right? We need to continue to be rich, right? And continue to be richer and richer in terms of status and so forth, right? So yeah, very good. Anybody else want to add? Good. All right. So that's okay. All right. So we've reached the end of our journey. So let me say a few things in terms of what's next for us tomorrow. We're going to have our review session coming up soon for tomorrow. I'll give you the questions. But I want to talk briefly about what we're going to do tomorrow. Also about the post session and so forth. So let me say a few things about all that, okay? Okay, so first of all, if any of you liked some of the biblical stuff we were doing, some of the way we analyze the Bible, I'm teaching a class in the spring and it will all be thrown on the online. So it's a class called Plato and the Bible, actually. And we'll be looking at Hebrew wisdom literature. We'll be studying some of the book of Genesis. So if you liked what we did for Babel, we'll be looking more, also other things. We'll be doing the book of Genesis, the book of Ecclesiastes, the book of Song of Songs, the book of Ruth. Let's see, there's one more. It's not coming to mind, but one of the Gospels, I don't know which one yet. And we'll be looking at those books philosophically, right? These are philosophical books. So if you want to go deeper into what we've been doing here in terms of the little biblical meditations, that class will be thrown in my YouTube channel, right? So in the spring, you can follow regularly that class. So I would, you can go to my YouTube channel, type Abby Dukan, and you should find me. Just go on YouTube and type my name and you will see the channel. If any of you want to go deeper in philosophy in general, in the same channel, there is a course called The Wisdom of Love. This is the class where I'm teaching love from a philosophical perspective. There is a class called The Wisdom of Suffering. Actually, no, it's called God and Evil. So this is the issue of, if there's a God, why is there so much suffering? So we're talking about that. And then there's a class where I do some African philosophy. And this is a class on modern philosophy, where we study the concept of the stranger. So if you liked the notion that we talked about of welcoming the stranger, I'm going to be doing, it's already on my YouTube channel. There's a whole class where I bring in some of the African philosophy and we talk about the welcoming of the stranger, right? So you can actually, if you want to, you can go deeper, follow these courses, which are posted on YouTube. And the new one coming up in the spring is the one on the Hebrew Bible, right? Any questions on that particular channel? So you can actually go deeper if you choose to. Now the post session, I have to scan the book for you. So I have to go home. I'm not home right now. So I'm going home at the end of the week. At that time, I will scan everything. I'll send it to Rod. And probably I will ask you to just read the pages Yeah, do I want to keep recording? It's okay for now. It's fine. I guess I should stop. Yeah. It's okay. So yeah. So I'll scan the pages, and then what I will ask of you is simply a one-page response, single-spaced, on what you've read. That's all. But I would like you to read that book because it is the book Philosophy for Africa by Augustine Shati that we talked about, right? Any questions on the post session so far? Okay. All right. Then the bonus class is tomorrow. Only one page, yes. Only one page, single spaced. Yeah. I'll write it out when I send to Rod. Yeah. Because the reading is a lot, right? So I really do want you to read the book. But in terms of your response, I don't want to be bored by pages and pages of whatever. I don't want to be bored by you. No, it's not so long. It's, I don't know exactly, maybe 150 pages. So you take your time, you read, and then you write me this response, right? Yeah, Sophia is always creating problems. Good. Okay, the bonus class is tomorrow. So good news, we are going to start at 11 a.m. Bad news for Cole, obviously. We're going to start later. We're going to take a little vacation. During those 2 hours, you can do the test if you want, right? The test is due on Sunday. So if you want, you can take those 2 hours in the morning, 9 to 11, do the test. But then we will have 3 bonus classes. I should stop the recording. Rod is right.